Hello guys, Assalamu alaikum. Hope everybody is fine and doing great. So let's begin today's lecture with A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It's lecture number 2 of chapter number 3, and in this lecture we'll have discussion on foreign exchange market and international money market, which is also called euro currency market. Before this lecture we had discussion on it was a more of a general discussion, or we can say an introductory discussion on the international financial markets, where we discussed we had discussion on the international financial markets on introductory level. We had discussion on foreign exchange market and international money market, international bond market and stock market, and euro bond market on an introductory level. But in this lecture today, in the upcoming lecture, lecture 3, we'll specifically talk about these financial markets in details. Today we'll have these two markets. So let's begin the discussion on the foreign exchange market. Foreign exchange market is a market where currency is traded to another at a rate called exchange rate. There are different currencies traded. Traded means bought and sold at a rate, at a price or a rate, which is called exchange rate. So basically, what is exchange rate? Exchange rate is basically a rate at which one currency can be exchanged for another currency. The foreign exchange market allows currencies to be exchanged in order to facilitate international trade or financial transactions. We know that different countries have different currencies, and then we have one international currency which is called dollars. So basically all different currencies rates are determined or specified based on the international currency, the dollar. Each country sets its exchange rate with respect to dollar, and then the currencies are cross exchanged with one another, looking at the power of each currency with respect to the dollar. The system of establishing exchange rates has evolved over time. It has passed through 3 stages until now. So how this exchange rate system, or how these exchange rates have been developed, in how this whole idea of foreign exchange market came into existence, it's because of these 3 stages. Let's talk about these 3 stages. Number 1 is gold standard. That's basically the first stage of foreign exchange market. In this period, there was no dollar as a global currency, as a standard currency. Rather, it was gold, based on which different currencies rates were specified, and it basically started in 1876 and ended in 1913, which was before the World War I. During the World War I, there was no system of currency exchange, or there was no specific exchange rate, because most of the world was busy in the war until 1945. So basically 40 years, World War I and World War II have been fought. At the end of World War II, the gold standard have been basically eradicated from the world exchange system, and the dollarization or dollar was made the international currency, and dollar was to be made the standard to specify the exchange rates between one currency and other currency. So gold standard is the era from 1876 till 1930, where each currency was convertible into gold at a specific rate, and the rates between different currencies of the world, it was based on the dollar, based on the power of that currency to the gold, which means that each currency was backed by the gold. But after 1930, specifically after 1944, the gold standard was removed, and now after 1944, the currencies are basically backed by the dollar, and the currency exchange rates are specified looking at the power of the currency to the dollar. Okay. The second stage is agreements on fixed exchange rate. There were two agreements which are called fixed exchange rate agreements. Number one is Bretton Woods agreement. Number two is Smithsonian agreement. Bretton Woods agreement was basically held after the World War II in the Bretton Woods, right, which basically removed the gold standard from the world, and it was decided that the dollar should be the international currency throughout the world, and behind the back of the dollar there was gold. The rate, we can say the power or the rate of the dollar was taken from the gold, and for the rest of the currencies throughout the world, it was determined what rate should be used by each country against the dollar, and that agreement is called Bretton Woods agreement. This agreement was basically held by the basically initiated by the Bretton Woods institutions, which is basically let's talk about it here. Bretton Woods, it's a Google search, you can see there was a conference by the name of Bretton Woods Agreement Conference. It was basically between the allied nations of the World War II. Under this agreement, all the countries promised that their central banks would remain fixed exchange rate between their currencies, and the dollar means they will use the dollar to exchange their currencies, and the rate will be fixed across. This agreement was held in the Hampshire, and the organizations, which we call them the Bretton Woods organizations. Bretton Woods organizations were basically the IMF and the World Bank, and you can, if you see the history of the IMF and World Bank, it traces back to the 1944. After the World War II, basically these two organizations came into existence, and the main purpose of bringing these two organizations into existence was to eradicate the dollarization from the world, and to enact dollar as an international currency around the world. And first they tried to maintain a fixed exchange rate, and for that they had to first do the Bretton Woods agreement or conference, and then Smithsonian. And the Bretton Woods conference, it was decided that Italy will have a fixed exchange rate of 625 lire. Similarly, France and Canada and UK and Germany and Japan a fixed exchange rate was determined against $1 for each country. Later on, some of the countries they basically started not following the Bretton Woods Agreement. That's why the other conference was held between Belgium, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan, Netherlands, Sweden, and United Kingdom and United States, and they made some adjustments to the system of fixed exchange rate, which was established under the Bretton Woods Agreement, and created a new standard for dollar, as the other industrialized nations picked their currencies to the US dollars. So what happened that the system of fixed exchange rate, maintaining the fixed exchange rate, it basically started collapsing. So in order to maintain it further, they had to do a second agreement, which is called Smithsonian Agreement, which was in 1971, and it continued till 1973, which again failed because it was impossible to maintain a fixed exchange rate system throughout the world because of the different nations pledging their currencies to the dollars. So that's why they introduced a new system, which is called floating exchange rate system. So the official boundaries for more widely traded currencies were eliminated, and the floating exchange rate system came into effect because governments had difficulties maintaining exchange rate within the stated boundaries. Basically, these two first agreements, they had certain boundaries under which the fixed exchange rate will be used against the dollars, but the rest of the countries who were not within the boundaries of these two agreements, they started pledging their currencies against the dollar, which basically dollar started devaluating and against those currencies within the boundaries. So that's why in floating exchange rate system, they eliminated the boundaries, and they made the dollar worldwide currency, and it was difficult for the countries who were within the boundaries to have a fixed exchange rate against the dollar, because other countries were pledging their currencies onto the dollar. So in order to remove this difficulty, they established the floating exchange rate system. From 1973 till now, it's a floating exchange rate system, and so different nations have different currencies, currency exchange rates against the dollar, and it's basically determined by the central bank, keeping in mind the various factors affecting the economy of that country. So each country has to decide their own, central bank basically, their own exchange rate against the dollar with respect to their currency. So there were three basically stages or that foreign exchange market has gone through. Number one was gold standard. Number two was agreements on we can say fixed exchange rate system and floating exchange rate system. In fixed exchange rate system, there have been two agreements. In floating exchange rate system, so after these two agreements fail, still there is a floating exchange rate system going on throughout the world. So there is no specific boundaries or location where traders exchange currency. Traders also occur around the clock. Trading occurs around the clock. Anytime during the day or night, you can exchange a currency into other currency. the market for immediate exchange is known as spot market. Spot market is where you can convert one currency into other on the spot and quickly. That becomes spot market. There are some other markets which is called forward market and interbank market. Forward market, in the forward market, multinational corporations basically they lock in exchange rate at which they will buy or sell a certain quantity of currency on a specified date in the future. For example, multinational corporations, in order to get the benefit from the exchange rates, they determine a specific rate in a specific time in the future, so that when that specific rate or that specific future date, when the rate, that specific rate is hit by the specific currency, they will convert their currency, they will buy or they will sell that specific currency in order to earn money or generate profit. Other market is interbank market. Interbank market is basically a foreign exchange market where one bank, or we can say brokerage firms, they trade in currencies between one another. Like one bank sells the currency to other bank sells the currency to other. So interbank or inter-brokerage firms transactions on the foreign exchange market, that is called interbank market, right? So we have three markets in the foreign exchange. One is called spot market, where anyone can go and exchange its currency on the spot. We have forward market. It's the market where entities place an order to buy or sell a specific currency on a specific rate in the future date. While interbank market is basically the market, basically the transactions made between the banks or between the brokerage firms, where they buy and sell, but it's not the other organization, it's only the brokerage firms and the banks themselves. That becomes interbank market. Okay, so throughout the world there are about 12 top companies who handle about 70% of foreign exchange transactions. So they can be these are basically the names of the companies who own the 70% transactions of the foreign exchange market. We have JP Morgan, we have UBS. JP Morgan is a company who basically owns have about 10.78% of the foreign exchange transactions. UBS has 8.31%. XTX markets have 7.5%. Deutsche Bank basically have 7.3%. Citibank has 5.3% of transactions from that 70%. HSBC have 5.3%. Jump Trading, their transactions are about 5.2%. Goldman Sachs, they have about 4.6%. Straight Street is a company whose transactions are about to 5.6%. Bank of America, it's about 4.5% of the foreign exchange transactions are of Bank of America. Then we have BNP Paribas, they have about 3.4% of transactions. And we have HC Tech, basically they have 3.3% of the total overall worldwide foreign exchange transactions. If we add up all these percentages, it will reach to 70%. 12 companies handle about 70% of the transactions around the world, and the name of those companies I've just mentioned. Okay, bank provides foreign exchange services for a fee. The bank's bid quote for a foreign currency will be less than the ask quote. Basically, bank provides two prices for a currency to be exchanged. Number one is bid rate, number two is ask rate. Bid rate is basically lower and ask rate is basically higher. Bid rate is the one at which they will buy a foreign currency from you, and ask rate is the one basically they will sell the foreign currency on you. So the difference between the bid rate and ask rate is basically the return or the profit of the banks. And the difference is called ask or bid rate, ask or bid spread. How can we calculate that? It's usually in percentage. We can calculate it by subtracting bid rate from the ask rate and divided by the ask rate, right? So for example, if we want to purchase pound, so if the bid rate means the buy rate is 1.52 against the dollar, and ask rate is 1.6. You see, ask rate is you sell, it's high, and bid rate is when they buy, it's low. So the difference is basically the return of the. So let's see what percent is this difference. What is the percentage of profit that the banks make from these transactions? That's basically 5%. How? We have formula. Ask rate is 1.6. So 1.6 minus bid rate, which is 1.5, divided by 1.6. When you multiply, when you deduct and divide, you will get 5%. The bid and ask spread is normally larger for those currencies that are less frequently traded. Basically, this percentage is basically very high for those currencies which are less common in that specific market. For the currencies which are very common and very people trade them very much, this basically this percentage will be very low. The spread is also larger for retail or transactions than for wholesale transactions. For example, if you convert $100, this will be high. If you convert $1 million, this could basically bank will give you a very low sell rate. So because the transaction is high, they can earn more, so they will give you discount. So that can be for wholesale transactions, you can get a good rate. For the banks, it's the same profit that they are earning, but the people who are basically transferring their currency into international currency, they will benefit. They'll be benefited from that if they have a wholesale transaction. Okay. Next, we have exchange rate quotations. There can be two types of quotations: direct quotation and indirect quotation. Exchange rate quotations for widely traded currencies are frequently listed in the new media on daily basis. The quotations normally reflect the ask price for large transactions. So if you visit the Afghanistan Bank, which is the central bank of Afghanistan, if you visit its website, you will see there are a few currencies whose ask rate and bid rates are mentioned. So for example, dollar, pound, dirham, dinar, rial. So basically the exchange rates for these international currencies or euro, for example, are given on the website on daily basis by the central bank of Afghanistan, and they'll have ask rate and bid rate. Bid rate is basically when you have those currencies and want to sell on the bank and bank want to buy, and ask rate is, for example, you have local currency and you want to convert them that into one of those currencies, international currencies. So you will see that ask rate is higher than the bid rate, which means they will purchase on lower rate and they will sell it to you on higher rate. The difference will be the basically their benefit. And all the other banks, they get the rate from the central bank, and mostly banks have their own ask and bid rates. So if anyone wants to convert their local currency to international currency, they have to search and they have to get the best quotation among the banks that they are dealing in foreign exchange. So usually there are two types of quotations. Direct quotation represents the value of foreign currency in dollars, while indirect quotation represents the number of units of a foreign currency per dollar, right? Which means if I give you a direct quotation, so I'll say $10,000. I'll say, for example, 80,000 Afghani equals to $10,000. If it's indirect quotation, I'll say, suppose 81.2, right? 81.2 equals to $1. That is difference between the direct and indirect quotation. There is a cross exchange rate, which is basically the amount of one currency per unit of another currency. For example, there are two international currencies and you want to know what is the exchange rate between them. So you'll put currency A, for example, Afghani and Pakistani rupees. So Afghani rupees is basically, let's suppose it's with respect to dollar, nowadays it's 82.1 or 81.5, for example. In Pakistani is, for example, 170, we can say 170, I think 165, or we can say 1.6 or 0.82, right? So when you divide them, you will get the cross exchange rate. Okay, we have currency futures, currency options, and currency forwards. These are three different types of markets where people deal in currency exchange. Basically, they are the contracts or the dealings which are made in the foreign exchange on specific market. For currency futures contract, there is currency future market. For options, we have option market, and for forwards, we have forward market. Let's see what is the difference between futures, options, and forwards. Future is basically a contract which specifies a standard volume of a particular currency to be exchanged on a specific settlement date, right? Future contracts are sold on exchanges. Means exchange markets. So when someone, for example, agrees with someone else, right, to exchange a particular currency on a specific date. For example, I say I will want to buy $10,000, for example, on 30th of July, and someone agrees with me on that. That becomes a future contract. And when I have this contract, I can sell it on to someone else and someone can buy it from me. Basically, I can trade it. Okay. These contracts are done in order to invest in foreign currency, foreign exchange market, to get profit in the future. For example, you don't have that money now, but you think that I will have this money in the future, and until that date, you know that the currencies from that exchange you can gain, then you will do that future contract. What is option? Option is a contract which give the right to buy or sell a specific currency at a specific price within a specific period of time. They are sold on exchanges, foreign exchange market too. Okay, so in future contract there was standard volume of particular currency, but here there is a right to buy or sell currency at specific price, right? In the future you specify the volume of currency, while in the option you specify the rate of currency, exchange rate of currency. That's the only difference, right? In future you specify the volume, for example $10,000. Then options you say I will buy or I will sell the dollar or specific currency if it is of this rate, exchange rate. You specify the exchange rate. Okay, next we have forward contract. It's an agreement between a foreign exchange dealer and an MNC that specify the currencies to be exchanged, the exchange rate, the date at which the transaction will occur. First, basically forward contract is a hybrid contract. It has the characteristics of both future and option, but it's different in both of them. It's same to future and forward because specific volume is also specified and rate is also specified. Rate and volume both. And future date is also specified, right? But the difference is that future and options, they can be exchanged. We can exchange them, but forward cannot be exchanged. So from this perspective, it's different in option and future. Future is different than the option because in future there is only volume. In the option, it's a specific rate. Forward is different than both of them because it cannot be exchanged. Otherwise, it has a volume and it has an exchange rate as well. And there are 3 agreements that people can do in the foreign exchange market, and those are called future, currency futures, currency options, and currency forwards. Okay, next we have international money market. All right, so what do we learn in international foreign exchange market? It was about when basically the exchange rate in foreign exchange market, how it took place. There were 3 stages that we discussed, right? And then we said that there will be spot market, there will be forward market, and there will be interbank market. And then there are currency exchange rates, ask rate and bid rate that we discussed. And there is cross rate, exchange rate quotations, and then direct and indirect quotation. And then we had cross exchange rate. And then we discussed that there are 3 types of agreements that people do in foreign currency, which is called currency future, currency option, and currency forward. Now let's talk about the international money market or euro currency market. It's a market where corporation and government can acquire funds for the short term, right? Corporations or governments need short-term funds denominated in currency different from their home currency. For example, in Afghanistan, the government of Afghanistan is in need of short-term funds in dollars, right, or in pounds or in euros other than Afghani. So from where will they get these funds? They can access to the international money market. It's for short term, and number 2, it's in other currency. The international money market has grown because firms may need to borrow funds to pay for imports denominated in foreign currency, just like Afghanistan, may choose to borrow in currency in which interest rates is lower. For example, different currency has different interest rates, so people are in search of the loan which is in lower interest rate in order to reduce this cost. So that's the other reason why the international money market has came into existence. May choose to borrow in currency that is expected to depreciate against their home currency. Sometimes, because you need to pay back the loan, so people are in search of those currencies, getting loan in those currencies, who are expected to depreciate against the local currency. For example, Afghanistan government is in need of short-term financing, so they will be in search of getting loan in a currency which they think in the future will be very low against Afghani. So for example, now if they get pounds, for example, 1 million pound is equal to 80,000, 8 million Afghani, for suppose. Afghanistan government thinks that in 6 months time, the pound will lower its value due to any reason, and now if it is equal to 80,000 Afghani, 8 million Afghani, sorry, in the future when we are going to pay back this 1 million pound, this 1 million pound will be equal to 5 million Afghani. So there is 3 million Afghani of return just from that exchange rate depreciation. So Afghanistan government will be looking into any currency who will reduce its price in the future against Afghani. So that's the other reason that the euro currency market has grown and has evolved. Okay. US dollar deposit placed in banks in Europe and other continents are called euro dollars. What are euro dollars? Deposits, US dollar deposits placed in banks in Europe and other continents, right? That's called euro dollars. Other than America, if anywhere in the world there are deposits of the dollars, especially in the Europe, that will be called euro dollars. In 1960s and 1970s, the euro dollar market, or what is now referred to as euro currency market, grew to accommodate increasing international business and to bypass strict US regulation on banks in the United States. So in the United States, there are strict regulations on the banks on the usage of US dollars, but those restrictions are not applicable across or other than the America. So people are tend to put their deposits in other than America into other European and non-European banks. So those dollars will be called euro dollars, and this depositing in and lending of those dollars other than America has made a market which is called euro market, euro currency market, or euro dollar market. The euro currency market is made up of several large banks called euro banks. The banks who are involved in the euro currency or euro dollars, they are called euro banks. They are very big banks which accept deposits and provide loans in various currencies, especially in dollars. Although the euro currency market focuses on large volume transactions, there are times when no single bank is willing to lend the needed amount. The recent standardization of regulations around the world has promoted the globalization of banking industry. In particular, in Single European Act has opened up the European banking industry. In 1988, Basel Accord signed by the G10 central banks outlined common capital standard such as a structure of risk weight for their banking industry. Basel is basically the name of a place, and accord means agreement. So in Basel, after a certain times, all the bankers, they get together and they pass new regulations. Till now we have Basel 1, Basel 2 and Basel 3 accords or agreements or documents, where they decide about the future of the banks, about the banking industries, and how the banks can be saved from bankruptcy. you know, basically, gold standard was something which was very stable, as gold has an intrinsic value. But from the time that there is dollarization and dollar standard has came into existence, there are more chances of being currency. In order to stop that, there are different types of organizations and there are different conferences held in order to save the world from being currency. And in those conferences, in those agreements or accords, they basically talk on how the dollar can be saved from getting depreciated and saved from becoming terminated as an international currency. And basically the banking industry, especially the World Bank and the IMF, is backing it up, because as dollar has become now standard and for all the countries around the world, if the dollar gets down, it's more likely that entire economy of the globe will be affected based on the globalization. The euro currency market is in Asia, and Asia is sometimes referred to as separate as the Asian dollar market. Asian banks that collect, deposit and make loans dominated in US dollars, those are called Asian banks or Asian dollar banks. The primary function of banks in in Asian dollars, a dollar market, is to channel funds from depositors to borrowers. Another function is interbank lending and borrowing. The market located in East Asia used for loans or bank deposits that are dominated in the US dollars. Origins and development. How this euro currency market or international money market came into existence. Number one, the first stage is European money market, which is the European region. There are banks who accept deposits and lend money in dollars and other different currencies. And there is Asian money market, especially centered in Hong Kong and Singapore. There are banks who mostly are their deposits and lending is dominated by the US dollars. So that's why that's called Asian money market or European money market. Otherwise, both of them are international money market. Okay, so that's all for today's lecture. I hope you guys learned. In our today's lecture, we had discussion on foreign exchange market, which I summarized earlier. The second discussion was on international money market or euro currency market. We said that the euro currency market has come into existence due to these three reasons, and it's a market where governments and banks do short-term financing in dollars, especially in other currencies. And we say that there are euro dollars and there are euro currency market or euro dollar market or euro dollar banks or euro banks. We discussed that, and we had discussion on Single European Act and Vessel Accord and what was their main purpose. Also, we discussed Asian dollar market and Asian dollar banks, and also we had discussion how the national money market came into existence, how it developed. It developed from the European banks and banks in Asia. Together, all of them are called international money market or euro currency market or euro dollar market, which is further divided into European money market and Asian money market, right? So the most important thing is that in this market, there are banks and governments who do short-term financing or short-term investment in international currency dominated by the dollars. Okay, thank you so much for being with me. If you have any questions, please get back to me. Thank you so much. Bye.